Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And today we're talking about The Courier, a film that was supposed to come out in October last year, but COVID stopped that, so we're kind of catching up with it. It's a historical spy film based on the true events around the Cuban Missile Crisis from an espionage point of view. So the main character is Greville Wynne, played by Benedict Cumberbatch, who's a real guy who I'd never heard of. You'd never heard of? No. And his relationship with Colonel Oleg Penkovsky, played by Mirab Ninidze, and again, a person I'd never heard of, the character that is, but again, a real person. Pankowski seeks to stop nuclear war. Khrushchev wants to put missiles on Cuba. He believes that he can strong-arm the Americans into this, that, and the other, even though Pankowski himself says, our arsenal is nothing like America's. You could wipe us out, we can wipe you out, says at one point. He seeks to avert nuclear war, and he reaches out to the British, who in turn reach out to the Americans, and they decide to get involved. A citizen, an ordinary citizen, a businessman, this is this Greville Wynne, Benedict Cumberbatch, who can travel to the Soviet Union, apparently on business, and forge contact between Pankowski and the West.
Yeah, so initially it's just meant to be about contact, and then it becomes more and more into espionage.
Yeah, so I want to say a couple of things straight off, which is I like films with titles like The Courier. You know, I haven't seen all of them, but for titles where it's a boring job title, The Courier, The Accountant, the Commuter, he's not a job title, but same thing. And they all say, like, this is an ordinary person who's going to get embroiled in something. Yes. That's very exciting to me.
Well, I love spy films. So, I mean, I think for me, the enticement was, you know, what I got a little bit from the poster, which was, it's a spy film. The poster had a noirish element. Yeah. And also, I like Benedict Cumberbatch. Yeah.
So do I.
So,
and we saw the trailer too. And actually, the trailer did make it look pretty, pretty interesting. The other thing I would say, straight off, is that I think it's a perfect companion piece to Bridge of Spies.
It is.
Very, very similar.
And very instructive, because I think I remember this discussion about Bridge of Spies where I argued that it's great filmmaking formally, right? But I hated the
ideology.
The ideology, yeah.
We've had this conversation a bit, and I think we may have had it in part on the podcast before, but we should
I think we did.
Go over it to some degree, because I think you're right. I think, and we'll get into spoiler territory, I think, quite quickly with this. The stories start off in a similar place, but they diverge quite severely.
Yes.
Well, the Bridge of Spies story, just briefly, is Tom Hanks plays a guy, I forget the guy's name, who is an American lawyer, again, an ordinary citizen, who at first defends a Russian spy caught on American soil as a public defender, and then becomes involved in going to East Germany to broker the release of an American soldier who's been caught there. And again, true events. The difference, and this is, in this respect is a spoiler for Bridge of Spies and for The Courier, is while they both see success to some degree, Bridge of Spies is unqualified. In The Courier, there are costs, and it is not an unqualified success at all. There is failure involved, to the point where Greville Wynne, has to spend 2 years in prison in a Russian gulag. That, I think, is an instructive difference. I think to some degree, it's a little bit like what Eddie Izzard said in stand-up comedy, admittedly, but he was talking about The Great Escape and how the American in The Great Escape lives to fight another day, and all the British are rounded up and shot.
Well, I mean, the juxtaposition that I wanted to make is, first of all, that the Spielberg film is great formal filmmaking, certainly in comparison to this, right? And in comparison to this, Bridge of Spies looks like a masterpiece, even though it's so banal about some of the ways that it thinks about people and espionage, would be my view. Yeah. But this is such banal filmmaking, really, that it prejudices a lot of the strong points of the story and the acting, would be my view.
Do go on.
Well, I was noticing from the beginning that most of the shots were medium close-up, medium long shot. It seemed it had a very TV aesthetic, and don't shoot me. Like, it seemed to be made for a small screen. Wasn't peopled with things that could catch the eye or add texture. It's very beautifully shot. Yeah,
wonderful lighting, and light kind of catches smoke and things.
Yeah, kind of, the lighting, and it's almost kind of classic, side lighting, the kind of lighting that you get in noir. Often you'll just have the light on a face, and sometimes it'll be quite harsh light, right? So the idea is not to make it beautiful, but also obviously it obscures the fact that there's nothing in the background except a face, right? Which I don't mind, right? So
well, I think those scenes you're talking about, I think really the gulag scenes towards the end, the interrogations, but they were quite striking to look at.
Yeah, they were, but the film has visual devices that seem to come out of the stage, right? And I was interested to learn that the director of this film was the director of the Royal Court Theatre. Yeah, and actually, that instantly made sense of the film for me, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So, it's a social issue film, it's a historical film, it's about, the importance of the individual and the strength of the human spirit. It's about Britishness, about, historical Britishness. And also the film is very stagey. It really is all about the performance with a few metaphoric devices.
Go on.
Well, a few shots that are meant to be striking, but that are actually not, reflections, things that are distorted through an oval lens that you sometimes see. It's a film that feels static and without movement. And, kind of the only time that I felt movement was those scenes where they're in the car and you're having like the trees kind of reflected on the windshield as they pass by, which is like, the most cheesy basic device. So
the thing about the oval, are you talking about where you see through the peephole into Greville's cell and he's lashing out?
Yes.
That's the one time I can think of, because it's not like they don't use distortive lenses. You look through a pinhole at that.
Yes, there are a couple of those incidents. There are also scenes where going up and down the stairs, you're seeing a slightly distorted image.
Right. Not sure that occurs to me as true. Distorted image.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I'm misremembering.
If you mean, I suppose if you mean distorted in terms of, because there's some like as you say, a mirror or frosted glass or something like that. That is used sometimes. I don't think. If you mean just the actual lens is doing like a fisheye thing, I don't think that's true.
No,
do you mean?
I'm not disagreeing with you, but those things are all meant to be like almost theatrical, attention-grabbing, formal devices. But actually, they work. You could see how they might work in theater, but they don't actually work very effectively on screen.
Yeah, I just want to be clear about what we were talking about. That's all.
Well, I think that's what I'm talking about. But the staginess is really built in. I mean, all of those shots that you see in the couple's flat, in Benedict Cumberbatch's flat, with the kitchen in one side, and what is it, the dining room in the other.
The living room.
The living room, and the phone on the side, and that's used over and over and over again. I mean, it's like...
Again, I wouldn't say it was used over and over. I remember it's when you're introduced to the household that they're sat back to back in the different rooms, and it's a very formal thing.
It's used practically every time the couple is in the house. You see that shot. True. Yes, you're always introduced with the kitchen on one side, the living room on the other.
In that planimetric straight-on shot? I don't think so.
Well,
it is used.
Well, it has been used. That was my perception. Yeah, right.
It's certainly an image of the inside of that house that stays with you. That is how it's introduced and set up.
Yes, and a very deceptive image, because then you learn that they're living in like this fabulous Georgian row house. So kind of, whereas the aesthetic is almost like, I don't know, a bedsit or something. Yeah, the kitchen on one side with a little curtain thing, or where the bin is. Yeah, and kind of the dining room.
That's true. That is. I didn't really thought about that, but you're right.
Well, that appears many times.
No. Well, the point is, but that particular shot does not. But that aesthetic aesthetic of what the inside of the house looks like, where it actually seems fairly squalid, is not what you see on the outside, which is a beautiful house, a townhouse.
And also, it's not in keeping with a man who has his own business that deals with international sales.
Yeah, exactly.
So
I think that, to me,
that was a theatrical thing. with no movement, no angle, no. I mean, it felt very stagey to me, and that staginess. So the reason why I began to look out for those things is, as we said at the very beginning of the film, from the first moment I saw Benedict Cumberbatch, right, I thought, oh my God, because he has obviously invented a walk for this character, right? And then you mentioned also.
Well, I said it's Benedict Cumberbatch acting is a limp, a mustache, a hat, a lisp.
So you were saying it's all these externals, right? I mean, the walk I noticed right away. And actually, in terms of Benedict Cumberbatch's performance, it didn't bother me subsequently because he won me over. I think actually he's great in this, right? And people have different way of building the performances, but my noticing that walk at first, I thought, well, that's in keeping, with the way that the scenes in the home are being shot, right? And actually, some of the scenes when they're taken out in London. Right, some of the shots are terrific stock footage of the Sound of Music. I forget what the big theater is on Shaftesbury Avenue. But then you also see like Soho at night, but some of them are very theatrical. Yeah, like faces kind of almost like rushing to the camera.
Well, can you talk to me about what's theatrical about faces? Because it occurs to me that what's theatrical is not faces. That's televisual. Theatrical would be blocking, staging. Right, people spread out in a that kind of thing.
No, but what I mean by theatrical here is a formal device used to gain a particular effect.
Right.
Yeah, that is often used in theater, and often it poeticizes or it allegorizes kind of what it's doing, right? And so here, those cameras and those faces in the nightclub, right, as they're meant to be having like this wonderful time, and they just rush to the camera, and there is a distortive effect to it, right? It's it's a form. Yeah, it's meant to indicate, that they're having like this
drunk revelry.
Yeah, this drunk revelry, and it's obviously there's an economic dimension to that. They're showing you this on a shoestring, right? Because if you just have four faces, you don't need to have like a whole nightclub or whatever. But the effect is I think of it as a theatrical effect. Yeah.
It's interesting you talk about it in terms of budget because it didn't occur to me that it looked like a cheap film. It didn't look expensive.
It did look, but it was visually very pleasurable, right? But it looked like done on a shoestring budget because the effects were achieved with sculpting light or, it wasn't, you didn't have long shots, you didn't have many extras in the shot, etc., etc.
Most of the time, yeah. They go to the ballet, and there are times when...
Well, they go to the ballet, and what do you see? You see what's happening in the ballet, and then maybe you are seeing like 40 extras or something.
There are shots of full crowds. There's also shots where you have Khrushchev addressing all of his people standing up and applauding. That's a full...
Fair enough, but there's full crowds and full crowds. It still felt like...
Fine. It's shot by Sean Bobbitt, who shot films for Steve McQueen. So he shot Hunger... He shot 12 Years a Slave, and he shot Widows. And Widows in particular is something I want to think about because you were talking about image distortions, reflections, double reflections in mirrors, things like that. That's something that was all over Widows, and you adored it.
I did.
And that is director of photography's bailiwick.
Listen, a director of photography can only do what the director indicates or allows. And actually, one of the things that I thought initially about the film, I thought, this is a cinematographer who knows how to get these effects, but doesn't know enough to poeticize them. Yeah. So, for example, there was very striking lighting on faces that nonetheless kept the face in shadows. Yeah. And I thought, wow, yeah. But also, the image itself didn't do more than that, right? So that was my initial feeling. Yeah, and then, of course, as the film progresses, you realize, well, actually, it's not the cinematographer's fault because, he's creating, like, wonderful effects on this. Yes. But actually, they're not being very well utilized. It's a director who's not making the most of what the cinematographer can bring in.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. The director, I should say, is Dominic Cook, who's directed one film before that neither you nor I have seen. Quite a small film, looks like. And, as I say, all of his experiences in theatre.
I want to be clear, that like these things that I was thinking about, the film's staginess and its staticness and, its use of these, what I'm calling theatrical devices, because, they're meant to have an effect, really. Like you do get those on stage, the lights go off or, so I thought that before I read that this guy was the director of the Royal Court. I mean, I'd never heard of the director. So I was just thinking those things, and then, of course, you just checking up on what the director had done before, you realize, this might be a reason why. But actually, I thought that before I saw a connection to the staginess. So, the staginess is an issue, and the staticness is an issue. If you think this is a spy film, and, there was almost nothing that was suspenseful. Even the scenes where they staged the getaway, that was not suspenseful.
I had a problem with the getaway. I agree with you. I think it kind of fell between two pillars, or whatever the phrase is. I think you can do it where you explain everything that's supposed to happen. You see the plan being formed, you see it being explained, and then you see how it happens, and you see how it probably goes wrong at some point, right? You see the comparison. And it's not explained well enough in advance to do that fully. It's also not doing the thing that I think a film like The Next 3 Days did brilliantly, which is where the plan is explained as it's happening. You understand what's supposed to happen. So in the Next 3 Days, the whole film is building up to this, getting his wife out of prison and escaping. And you see a lot of the build up beforehand, and you get an impression of what he's going to do. But actually, it's basically all kept a secret. And as the plan comes into action, you learn very quickly what's supposed to be happening. Sometimes half a second before it happens, because he's in the middle of doing it. Immediately it becomes legible, and then it either comes off or it doesn't. Something goes wrong. He has to improvise. He has to adapt, and you see everything that he's planned come into play in the moment, and it works very, very well. This also doesn't do that enough. So it's half of one and half of the other, and you don't feel quite enough about where everybody's supposed to be, who everybody is, for one thing. There's one character, they do talk about getting this boat over to Finland, and that will be freedom. And when the CIA woman is talking about that, she's with some young guy who you haven't seen before, and she says, "You'll be fine, don't worry about it." So obviously he's a new guy, but he's the one who's going to have something to do with the ferry. And then you see him a little bit.
And you think he's a traitor, that he's actually betrayed them. There's
maybe
a suggestion, but it's not clear.
I was confused about what his place was exactly, and where he was in the middle of the getaway.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't orchestrate that well enough at all.
No.
But it also is very clear that the moment that Pankowski comes home and rounds the corner to the living room, you know that there's going to be someone there with his wife.
I know, but that also was so badly filmed. It's like as soon as he says, "Honey, I'm home," or something like that, and you don't see, you just know that's happened, So I thought it was interesting because, Torn Curtain is seen as Hitchcock's very worst film, right? Or a lot of people kind of, they poke fun of it. And it's a work of dazzling genius in comparison to this. Because even though it's a failed work, and it's also about, Torn Curtain, the Iron Curtain,
right.
A spy.
I haven't seen it.
Oh, well,
no.
You should see it. It's Julie Andrews and Paul Newman, who everyone criticizes for being completely miscast and so on. But, it's a film that has tension, it has gore, you're nervous about what's going to happen to the characters, right? There's a scene on a bus where, you are tense about what's going to happen to them. Yeah, there's a fight scene in a house in the country, where, it's quite gory. Like, it has all this visceral effects on you. I didn't feel anything in this film at all, except a kind of admiration for the actors. Yeah.
Is that the only thing you liked? I like the storytelling.
I'm saying what feeling.
Right,
I didn't like the storytelling. I liked the cinematography, and I loved the actors.
Okay, well, let's talk about storytelling then. What's your criticism there?
Well, where do you begin? I mean, if the way that you're telling the story creates no tension, and it's meant to be a spy film, that's already like, what more problem do you want?
Well, put it this way, I was very engaged throughout, and I did want to know what would happen, how things would resolve. I felt invested in the characters. The story is very well paced, I think, and it could kind of keep me on my toes. For one thing, not knowing these people and not knowing this story, really not knowing where it was going to go, and actually not knowing if this guy would even survive. So I didn't expect him to be caught. I did think it would be we all got away. Although I suppose I thought maybe the Russian Pankowski would get caught. It felt honest to me. But the English guy getting out, the fact that he ends up spending 2 years in the Gulag was a surprise to me and was an interesting development.
Well, let me tell you why it wasn't a surprise to me, because earlier on in the script they tell you that is one of the options.
Oh yeah, I tell you it's an option, but very often that's setting up stakes. It's setting up stakes is the end of that sentence. Actually we're going to avoid that.
Well,
the fact that it happens and he has to suffer through it, interesting.
I thought that was all predictable. Actually, I thought it's almost like a stereotypical actor-driven, stage-driven production, right? That kind of and I don't disagree with you. It also held my interest,
right, until
almost like the end, yeah. Because then you wonder, well, just how are they going to get out of this and get it over with, really?
Whereabouts in the end, do you think?
Well, the bits where he's sent to prison, and then you forget about the Russian. The film forgets about the Russian until the conciliatory moment at the end. And there it began, to lose my interest, because I thought, this is going to be like torture until, they get him out. Which actually was not far wrong, So... I think what held the interest is Benedict Cumberbatch, right? And the dilemmas for him, and the way that he plays this kind of. I even loved his look. He's just so fascinating in this, because he can be very handsome, right? And in this one, he really does look like a Colonel Blimp figure, like not too bright. Middle-aged guy, really, and the move from him getting more involved, the relationship with the wife, the screaming at the child. I thought all of that he handled so beautifully, that it makes you forget the banality of the rest of the filmmaking.
I was disappointed in the reconciliation with the family at the end. Well, not reconciliation, meant it with the right word, the reunion with the family. Because, it's going to end up with that. In a way, I was kind of disappointed about a similar thing in 12 Years a Slave. The only similarity being the cinematographer. It's only on my mind for that reason, because I think the writer is not the same and all of that. But the thing about the end of 12 Years a Slave was, it just has this return to, after everything that he's been to, it must return to the family. It just feels, even though I suppose it's earned, in some respect, feels predictable and a little lazy. This doesn't even show him reuniting with his family. Last time we see him, he's getting out of the car, having been returned from Russia, having reunited with his family, and then they all go into the house. So you do see them together, rushing through the photographers. Then you get this shot where the mother and child are out of shot. It's just Cumberbatch back in his hall, and off screen you hear the kid say, "Where's Daddy?" or whatever it is, and he goes off, and that's the end. It wants to avoid the cliche while giving you the cliche.
It's a very badly told story, I think, and it's a story that is so director star driven that it betrays the other actors and the major components of the story. So, for example, if you've seen, what's the actress's name who plays the marvelous Mrs. Maisel?
Rachel Brosnahan.
If you see Rachel Brosnahan in the marvelous Mrs. Maisel, you see how witty and attractive and sexy and funny she is, and you see her in this, and you think, here's this amazingly super smart woman who seems to be practically running the CIA and conducting, and you can't make her sexy and attractive and funny, right? She's like a frump. And actually, one of the problems in the film is that no distinctions are made between the way people are dressed in England, in America, or in the US.
America is the US.
Sorry, Russia, the UK, the US.
Right.
So, I really felt that. And also, then, in terms of the storytelling, the weight that is given the Russian, what's his name? Penkovsky, right? Because he's the hero of the story, right? It's all right to focus on the Cumberbatch character because the film, it's a British film about him. But at least kind of make Pankowski, make it a two-hander, yeah? Like, give the guy more space and give the guy more emotional development and, kind of, I mean, show him to us after he's been arrested, what he might be feeling and what he might be facing. And, and that would have made the final reunion more meaningful. But no, they just dumped him.
I assumed he'd been killed. I mean, that's the, I assumed until you did see him again. My assumption was they had not shown you that. Actually, it's kind of for tasteful reasons almost. That actually it was kind of showing a respect for the character that's, unfortunately, he's no longer in the picture and he comes back. So maybe you have a point, but maybe it is actually supposed to function as a surprise that he's still around. It kind of did for me.
Well, it didn't work for me as a surprise. And actually, in terms of emotional weight, the scene between them would have had so much more meaning if you'd seen what he'd endured to get there, and then how actually the knowledge that he'd saved the world, would have made that torture or whatever we saw him face worthwhile.
Yes, I think you have a point. That scene didn't quite work well enough for me, but I did feel something when Cumberbatch reveals it to him in defiance of all the Russians around listening in, confronting them. And I did, I like the forcefulness of that, and I like the defiance of it, and I do like their relationship throughout. I think it's a real centerpiece of the film.
I again felt that was a weakness in the film because, again, it relied on theatrical effect. It was just the actor's voice and gesture with a chin, that was meant to convey all the weight of that, as if a camera didn't exist.
Wait, which you mean the very end?
The revelation to the guy that he'd saved the world. Yeah, it was all done through the actor.
As in Miravny Nidzi, who plays...
No, Cumberbatch 2.
I thought sorry, explain what you mean, I'm not sure.
Okay, what I mean is that the whole effect that he'd saved the world, that Cumberbatch says something, about the missiles not being in Cuba any longer. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the meaning and the weight of all of that is carried. He does it with the chin. He's shot from below, and he moves his chin forward, and to whisper to him, or to say to him, actually to defiantly say to him, if I remember correctly.
Well, he doesn't whisper at all. He shouts it. Yeah.
That he'd saved the world. So,
but he also gets up. He shouts across the table. It's a little bit more than just he moves his chin forward.
Oh, I thought it was just he moved his chin.
More, but I thought you were talking about the response from Ninidze playing Pankowski, which is a little blank, I felt.
And it's not the actor's fault. Because he's a great actor playing that part. I thought he was fantastic. But the character's not giving enough weight, and he's not. The character's not giving any weight, and he's not developed enough. No, he's not giving enough moments. He's not giving enough color, right? It's actually Cumberbatch who carries it all, right? And that's for better and for worse, because actually he is terrific, right? But I think, and sometimes the film has to hold back and let the actor carry. I don't have any problems with it. But I think this is a film in which, without the actor, the film is really nothing.
I did like the relationship between the two of them, though, throughout. I like seeing them learn about each other, start to get on together, spend good times and that kind of thing. I think they play off well each other. Basically, I think they have good chemistry.
They do.
And that works nicely, and it is a pleasure to actually be in their company when they're together.
Yeah. All right, so I think we need to wrap this up, really. Your final kind of summary?
I had a good time. So, fuck you.
I definitely will not be seeing it again, I can assure you.
No.
To me, it's a little bit like The Darkest Hour. Right?
Yeah.
But a little bit less smug than that. But it's a kind of banal filmmaking.
You can see it making me watch Bridge of Spies again, which is very easy to do because I really like watching Bridge of Spies.
Yes, well, you'll be much better off watching Bridge of Spies than watching this again.
And then when I watch Bridge of Spies, I tend to watch The Post again because I really like that too.
Well,
I think Spielberg has just really worked for me. Even though they are both the Tom Hanks, we know what's going to be said at the end of this. Filmmaking, America great. Yes. Everywhere else not so great. Freedom, freedom.
Yes, people decent.
Constitution. If you just had all those words at the end of a Spielberg film, it would make as much sense.
Anyway, I kind of, I suppose just to have a little bit of a last rant. There's such a tradition in Britain of stage directors, going off, and making movies, for no other reason than they've had success on stage in a way that very rarely, if ever, happens in Hollywood. I suppose Orson Welles is the exceptional kind of exception. Other people might have worked a little on the stage, but then they had to go through a route to make movies. Whereas here, there's so many, Peter Brook and so on, they all made movies. And it kind of upsets me because actually they don't know how, and this is an example of why. Yeah, they don't know how, right? So they're leaning on all the technical people, but actually they've got no visual flair and no skills, in terms of, how to convey storytelling. And it just feels banal.
Do you think that's also true of acting? Because acting is seen here as theatrical. You learn at stage school. In America, you learn at acting school, film school.
Well, I mean, my view, of course, is that American acting is just as great as British acting any day of the week, right? But it is a different tradition, and I think actors here are really wonderful. I mean, I wouldn't say that, Cumberbatch suffers, because he's someone who learns his trade on stage. I mean, he's fantastic in this. So, I don't have a problem with that. And the reason why I don't have a problem with that is because, Cumberbatch both, has a 20, 30 years experience of being an actor. So he's already got all of these skills. And obviously what he physically embodies just by the way he looks and moves and so on. So he's bringing in a whole weight of knowledge and experience that is not equivalent to what this stage director is bringing to this movie. Thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Audible, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Do you want to know, I did some spying of my own when the film ended, because a couple of people who came out of the film, two guys, were talking about it, and I sort of eavesdropped on them. Do you want to know what they said?
What they said?
Didn't hear a fucking word. Really bad at spying.
Oh, well. I'm glad we saw it, though.
Well, that's nice.
It's exactly the kind of
Bit
film
of positivity, why not?